listening to the Author Inside You podcast, a weekly podcast designed to motivate you to finish writing a book, choose a publisher, and have your work build an audience. Keep listening if you're looking to get propelled into the next chapter of your life. And now, it's the Author Inside You podcast with your host, Leah and Matt Rafferty.
Hello and welcome to the Author Inside You podcast. I'm Matt Rafferty.
And I'm Leah Rafferty.
Joining us today is Mike Olszewski. Mike and his wife Janice wrote Cleveland TV Tales. Mike is a veteran TV and radio personality in Cleveland, Ohio, and he also teaches media and communication courses at Cleveland State University, Kent State University, the University of Akron, and Notre Dame College. Mike, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Leah, Matt, it's such an honor to be here with you. Thanks very much.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Well, how did you get involved in finding out the history of Cleveland TV?
Well, you know, it's funny because I had started out in radio some time ago in 1977. I tried to get into it a little bit earlier, but I was trying to be a hippie for a few years, so I had to put that on hold. Didn't work out quite well. At any rate, I got into it in about 1977, and I grew up loving radio from back in the early 60s, and we got to know a lot of the pioneers that were around at that time. Keep this in mind, too. TV, when we were first looking at television as well as radio, television had only been around in Cleveland since 1947. So when I got into it in 1977, that is radio, I knew a lot of the TV people as well, and they had been around for a long time, but they were still working. So I got to work with a lot of the great pioneers. The thing was, they all had wonderful stories, and they would just sit around trading these crazy stories that were not showing up in books. When I got the idea to actually do some history books, and this is going back, already to 2003. My wife Janice and I said, with all the great people that we've spoken to and that we knew, maybe we should get their stories down on paper. It's important to know when stations went on the air, the kind of programming they had, and even the times that they went on the air in, but it's the stories that really help sell what the medium was all about.
Well, it must have been a lot of fun doing the research for this book.
Well, it was great fun, and I'll tell you what, one of the things that people forget is that we look at radio and television like it's tap water. It's there when you need it.
Sure.
You turn it on, you turn it off, and it's gone. But especially with radio and TV, we forget just how much these people really did influence us through the years. I mean, think about this. Lynn Sheldon was on the air. Barnaby was on the air from 1954 on, but Lynn Sheldon was on Cleveland television from 1947 into the 90s.
Wow.
Wow. Captain Penny, he was on for 20 years. And I mean, Dorothy Foldheim, I don't have to tell you, she's one of the queens, and Dick Goddard, of course, even broke her record. So those days are unfortunately behind us where we're seeing those long-term people. But, it's funny, we have a friend who lives out in Hollywood. He's a producer there, and there's a Cleveland clan out there. And these are people that, these are actually people that just get off from Cleveland. And he says, if you see a group of people from Cleveland at a party, you're not allowed into their conversation unless you're actually from Cleveland.
Oh.
Because, yeah, I mean, it's they're not talking about, the business or anything like that. They're talking about Cleveland. When was the last time you were there, and what did you see?
Well, that's funny you just said that, because I'm thinking when you brought this up that was from Drew Carey, but now I realize I read that in your book.
Yeah, well, Drew Carey is actually one of the people out there. You had Drew Carey, Jack Riley, so many wonderful people. But, hey, it was the Cleveland clan. That's what it was all about.
Yeah,
Very
that's
neat.
great.
So how long did it take to research and put all the stories together and do all the interviews and everything for the first Cleveland TV Tales book?
It doesn't take long because so many of these people had given us these stories, and we wrote down so many of them. In fact, with some of the people like Lynn Sheldon and Gib Shanley and people like that, I knew it was going to be important because they were getting on in years, and I wanted to get interviews with them. And I sat down with Lynn. I got about 4 hours with him. The guy that played Woodrow the Woodsman, Clay Conroy, his producer, Dave Little, actually sat down and did lengthy interviews with him, and some other people who had the foresight to interview these folks. So the research wasn't that hard. Now, sometimes there are failing memories, and that's where the Cleveland Press and Cleveland Plain Dealer archives come into it. But remarkably, I think most people were right on the money as far as dates, the people he interacted with, and it really didn't take that long to research, just to kind of double up on the dates. I will say this, writing the book, maybe a little bit longer because there were different things going on at the same time, and you wanted to give all of them the same kind of attention.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
So I would say it would take me about 3 months to write the book.
Wow, that's pretty good. Okay, so
well,
now you...
I was also blessed. I was blessed because I have a great researcher. My wife, Jan, is incredibly precise with her research. And we would go to the library and things like that. And we would spend sometimes 7 or 8 hours a day in the library just verifying facts. But I was very fortunate to have Janice working with me on research.
Well, it's wonderful to have a project that you both can work on, I'm sure.
A nice teammate like that.
Yeah.
Sometimes Jan was so thorough in her research, she would spend hours looking for somebody's middle initial.
Oh.
And we would have whispering arguments in the library. If you can't find the initial, we won't use the initial. If you use the initial, we are using the initial. That's going back.
Oh, my gosh. So when you did those interviews, did you record them with an audio or video tape, or did you just do everything, just with a pen and a piece of paper?
Oh, no, always audio and even some video. But it was so important to get those voices down because, it's funny, especially with guys like Lynn Sheldon and Gib Shanley, you forget just what they were like in a conversation. And it wasn't like they were on TV, but you forget that, you had a personal bond with them as well. And that's the important thing about that. And also, I think for future generations, sound and storing sound and sound cloud or something like that is very important. I think that we wanted to get the audio down just for accuracy, but also because their voices tell a lot about them as well.
Right. So I think using audio is a great idea because you can be more connected with the story and ask questions instead of writing down every word. And did he say that word or this word as you're writing it down?
Well, plus the inflections, I would think.
Yeah, the inflections were very important. And also, when you're just taking notes, and I knew people who just took meticulous notes, but even then, you're always afraid that you're going to miss something. You don't want to do. Sure. So that was the importance of recording it. But I kept those recordings, and thank goodness I did because actually, I've got 4 hours of Lynn Sheldon telling stories about his kids, and I'm going to make sure that all of them get copies of them.
Oh, that's
very
nice. That's nice. All right, so now you've done the research. You and Janice have done the research. What do you do from here? Do you find a publisher, or do you self-edit? What happens next?
Well, we were very lucky because David Gray with Gray & Company Publishing is very much into pop culture and Cleveland history, and this is a perfect union of the two. We went to him, we explained what we wanted, and he just encouraged us along the way. Now, he may have given us some direction. Maybe I'm spending too much time with one character, not enough with another. And I did the writing. Jan did the research on this. But he's also very careful to make sure that people, for example, like photos. If photos are used, he has to make sure that people get licensing fees. He obviously doesn't want to get us into any kind of problems as far as violation of intellectual copyrights or anything like that. We've been very lucky to work with Gray & Company Publishing, and he's got a great staff that works with him too.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. The covers of your books have a lot of photos on there, and I know that they must be owned by either the personality or the TV station that originated that photo. Was that a big chore getting those photos and approval?
It can be a big chore. Finding the proper photos. Here's the thing about radio and TV, because whenever you do look up people, most of them are staged or they're just poses. And you want things that compel action, that make you think that there's something going on instead of them just standing there with their hand on the wall or something like that. The Cleveland Press Archives at both Cleveland State University and at the Cleveland Public Library were great help. And a lot of times, because it has been so long since these photos have been published, frankly, the photographers are no longer with us. Mm-hmm. And the ownership is now with the Cleveland Public Library and the Cleveland State Archives. So you just have to give them credit. If we can track down a photographer who is still alive, like the great George Shuba or the wonderful photos from Janet McCoska, we make sure they get their licensing fee, and it's an agreeable licensing fee. There's something that they think is fair for everyone.
Great.
So what about, you said you went to Gray Publishing, but did you just walk in and they said, oh, okay, or was there any, did you have to try to sell it?
Well, prior to this, I had done a book for Kent State University Press called Radio Days, and it was the history of FM rock radio in Cleveland. Oh. Now, the thing about an academic press is it never goes out of print. However, you write it as though it is an academic work. A lot of footnotes, things like that. And it was important that we got that history down. But to tell the stories, you needed something outside of that format. I was well aware of David Gray's books, having worked with Tom Farron and Rich Heldenfels to a small degree on the Ghoulardi book, and also with Lynn Sheldon on Barnaby and Me. So I knew with David Gray, the kind of book that he put out. Put together a prospectus. We had a couple of really good conversations, and he said, let's see where it goes. And, of course, he said, I'll tell you right now, I'm very encouraged by this, but there's no promises until we actually have a contract. which made perfect sense.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, that's nice, though, that you didn't, some people have a very difficult time trying to get a publisher. So that's pretty nice that this worked out so well.
well, another thing, too, keep in mind the kind of people that David Gray is publishing. You have a lot of people that were in the media. So you have people like Neil Zurcher, Dan Coughlin. Oh, there's so many wonderful people, Chuck Shadowski being one. So they know the importance of using media, but also using notoriety to sell the book. So that helps a little bit, too. Larry Morrow is another one. I think that it's important for people to know how to promote a book, and certainly if you were in radio or TV, you know how to promote it as well, hopefully, as well as how to tell a story. Let me just point something out too. After I got done with the Radio Days book, it was a different kind of writing. It was more historical research type writing. My good friend Carlo Wolf read over the manuscript for the first Cleveland TV Tales, and he looked over at me and he said, "Don't take this the wrong way, but you tell a story a lot better than you write one." And he said, "Here's what advice to you." He said, "Write the story the way you tell a story." I wrote a rewrite of Cleveland TV Tales, gave it to David Gray, and there was hardly any editing.
Wow, wonderful.
I mean, it was just like that. It was the best advice I ever got.
Wow.
Carl Wolf is a wonderful writer as well. So I encourage anybody to, if they ever have a chance to read anything Carlo's, to please do so.
Did Gray Publishing edit, or did you have to have it edited before you gave it to them to publish?
I generally try to edit myself, and it's kind of tough sometimes because when I did the first book, Radio Days, the manuscript was over 1,000 pages, and I brought it in a big box, and they looked at me and said, "What is that?" And I said, "Well, that's the manuscript." And they said, "Oh, no. If it's double spaced, how many?" I said, "Over 1,000 pages." They said, "Well, that means it's over 1,000-page book." And I said, "Well, can you make it Radio Days 1 and Volume 1 and Volume 2? And they said, "We'll be right up front with you. If Radio Days 1 doesn't sell, there's no Volume 2. So they said, "We're going to need you to take out a few pages." And I said, "How many?" And they said, "Well, at first we're thinking about 600.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
It was like doing surgery on one of your kids. But it made for a stronger book. So it just, I did not have to deal in all the minutia. I asked them if they wanted to put out a director's cut, and they said that's not going to happen either. And it's funny, we went back and forth, and they said, "Look, if we were to put out this book the way you want it, with no photos, because that eats up a lot of ink, just the base price would be $86. And no one buys an $86 book."
Yeah.
Right.
I said, "Hold on a minute. What about that Beatles anthology?" And then the silence fell over the room, and they said, "What did you just say?" And I said, "How many pages do you need?" And I said, 600.
Right.
But I do try to do as much editing as possible. But at the same time, I realize that I don't want to do a lot of editing. So I will just put in the information I think is necessary. But David also has editors that look over it. And thank goodness, because he has people that look over the manuscripts. And sometimes, no matter how careful you are, something will slip by and you have to have David take care of it. So he's been pretty good with that.
Great. So, Mike, I see that you've written other books. So could you tell us a little bit about a couple of the other books that you've written?
Yeah, they're all media related, basically. Radio Days was the history of Cleveland FM radio, and from 1965 really to the present, which was 2003 when it was edited. There was another book I did with Carlo Wolf that was called Wixie 1260, the story of Superman, Six Packs, Supermen, and oh my gosh, I forgot the third part.
No, it's okay. But that was a radio station that was in Cleveland.
Yeah. It was Pixie, Six Packs, and Superman. That's what it was. Went back to David Gray because he has such excellent distribution, and he had wonderful promotional links as well. And they pay off because you have to look at a lot of things when you're looking for a publisher. What kind of books they put out and how much promotion they're going to give you. So when we had TV Tales, Jan and I went to Gray, and we had done some work with him in the past, saw the great promotional push that he puts behind these books, and also the kind of books he did, and we've been with him ever since.
Great. So what kind of promotion does he do for you?
A lot of radio and a lot of TV because that's what sells it. But at the same time, we do a lot of author-type events where we go to libraries, what bookstores that are left. And we speak out a lot at a lot of different events. And it's mostly people that remember radio and television. Mm-hmm. It's wonderful because it's kind of nice to go and speak to, I like to call them older crowds. I mean, it's the baby boomers who are part of the first generation of television. And Jan and I will go out to speak to them, and we don't have to explain to them about the impact of Ghoulardi, the importance of Barnaby, and the life lessons that Captain Penny gave us.
Sure. So you go to your audience, right? You go to the people who are interested in buying the book and And you find those groups.
But I have to say that even if you're not from the Cleveland area, I think people would find these books very interesting because you speak about how in the beginning of TV, there was no rules for programming. They didn't know how to fill the hours, and I'm sure that was happening throughout the country. So I think anyone who's interested in TV would be very interested in reading your books. You don't have to be from Cleveland.
Yeah, very true. Another thing, too, about David, he likes to vary the topics because we have enough material for TV Tales 3 and 4.
Okay.
But he said, before we do that, why don't we look at some other topics as well? Because we wanted to give everybody just a little bit of a breather. Plus, he doesn't want to confuse people if they see how many TV Tales on the stand.
Oh, sure.
Mm-hmm.
So our next book that's coming out in a few weeks is going to be actually Cleveland Radio Tales. And these are the crazy stories that happen behind the scenes in Cleveland radio. And I'm going to warn you right now, some will curl your hair. So,
well, congratulations. You certainly have made a nice career out of writing the books about Cleveland history.
Well, and it's funny you mention that, Leah, because I think it's fun to do this, but Jan and I seem to think that it's sort of like our duty to get these stories out because one of our best friends is a guy named Matt Penfound. And Matt Penfound is the son of Ron Penfound. And his kids were all born 20 years after Ron had passed away from lung cancer, I might add.
Oh.
And they never knew the impact of their grandfather. But it's funny because Matt came up here to Cleveland, and we have an event every year called Goulardi Fest. And it's a celebration of old Cleveland TV and Goulardi. And we brought Matt up here just to meet people and talk about his dad. He brought his son Matt with him, and his son Matt was like 16 or 17 years old. People were not only asking for Matt's autograph, but also for his son Matthew's autograph.
My gosh.
A picture taken with him. And we've known Matthew since he was a little kid. And he came over and he said, I had no idea. And I said, I got news for you. Your grandfather was Justin Timberlake.
Yeah.
I said, that's
yeah.
Right.
Well, that's the thing for the people who aren't from Cleveland or are listening to this podcast. Goulardi Fest is a huge, huge deal in Cleveland. It seems like we have a lot of local personalities that people really are devoted to.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, it's important to come out and meet those folks now because, quite honestly, a lot of them are retiring. They go to Florida, they travel, they do whatever. So I remember the first Goulardi Fest, we had Woodrow the Woodsman and Superhost was there, and the cast of Lost in Space, and all kinds of wonderful. I keep in touch with Marty, too. Last time I talked to him, it was probably, I hate to say this, it was probably several months ago.
Okay.
But he lives up in Oregon, way up in the woods of Oregon. Yeah. And I think he's 4 hours from an airport. That's how far away he is.
Oh, my gosh. So I was thinking about the 1,000-page manuscript that you had. Have you thought about turning that into a blog? And maybe...
A lot of people have suggested I do just that. And it may be in the future. I really kind of like that idea because there was a lot of history and a lot of minutia there, too. But at the same time, I was hoping that it wouldn't just interest people who were in radio. I don't think it will, but I mean, a lot of the stuff was technical, and I wanted to cover the entire history. So I think at some point it will get published.
Excellent.
In one way or another, blog, whatever. Sure.
So it sounds like your journey has been pretty carefree and nice.
Well, I'll tell you what, the fun part of all of this is still doing the research. And it's hunting down the pictures, hunting down the people that were there, hearing the crazy stories that happened behind the scenes. And at the same time, I know enough about these people, and I know enough about the events and the times that they're not going to fool me. I know what happened and what did not happen.
Okay.
But I like to hear some of the crazy stories. And I don't know if the name Don Novello strikes a chord.
Oh, sure. I know Don Novello from the Laszlo letters. Sure. And Father Guido Sarducci.
Exactly. And the Laszlo letters play into this. He played Father Guido Sarducci on Saturday Night Live. He worked with the biggest names in show business. And he and I were going to do a taping, and I said, well, meet me at Swingo's restaurant. So he came to town, and Lynn Sheldon was there, and he grabbed my arm, and he said, is that Lynn Sheldon? And I said, yeah. And he said, I've always wanted to meet him. For the next 2 hours, he sat there, and you could tell the affection in his eyes looking at Lynn Sheldon. So afterwards, Jan had her camera up, and he had his Father Guido Sarducci outfit. So he put it on, and there's a picture of him and Lynn Sheldon together. So Jan took the picture. So Jim Swingo said, to the day he closed the restaurant, with all the celebrities that came through that restaurant, the one thing that came that very day was, hey, what's Father Guido Sarducci doing with Barnaby?
That's funny.
So about maybe 2 weeks later, and every time I talked to him after that, he mentioned, how's Lynn doing? So about 2 weeks after we met him, I got a copy of the Laszlo letters in the mail, and it came with a little card, and it said, Mike, I make you a cardinal in my church, Father Guido Sarducci. So I went over to Lynn's house, and he didn't know Father Guido Sarducci, who he was. He just thought he was a nice guy. He said, hey, that buddy of yours, he sent me a book. and it was the Laszlo letters. But he sent him a card, and it says, "Lynn, I make you the Pope in my church."
Oh.
I can never get over Lynn Sheldon. He always upstate me. How do you beat that?
Oh, that is great. So, do you have any advice for authors out there who are thinking about writing like maybe a history book, a local history book?
Here's my advice for writers and for would-be authors. First of all, find a topic you know and that you really like, okay? And if you can put in your own personal experience, that's great. But I'll pass on the greatest advice I ever got for writing, and that was from Carlo Wolf. Tell me a story. Tell me a story the way you would tell a story. And I mean, if you can write in a conversational tone and you do your research and you double-check your facts, you're going to do really well.
Right.
Also, don't write too many words. Nobody's impressed by the word count. What they want is the stories. Gray usually puts out my books. Jan and I put out books of about 190 pages. The reason is, when you pick up a book, a lot of people see it as a commitment. And if it's too big of a book, a lot of times people say, well, I'm going to look for something a little lighter than that. Lighter in weight, obviously, not necessarily. But the one complaint we've had is a wonderful complaint. And that is, people will say, I have a bone to pick with you. I started your book at 9 o'clock and I went to bed at 3.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, right.
And they say to themselves, one more story, couple more pages. Okay, one more story. Next thing you know, they read the whole book. And I said, that's exactly the kind of problem I want to hear.
Well, speaking about that, can you purchase your books as ebooks?
I don't know if we're doing it with Kindle or ebooks now. In fact, I've never asked David. I think you can. I'll have to check with him to tell the truth.
Okay, all right.
Because what I'm doing usually when he's publishing one book, I'm finishing work on the next.
All right, so we spoke a little bit about marketing. You said great publishing helps you out with the with the marketing. Do you do any marketing using social media?
You know, we do. We usually do, as a matter of fact. And it's great because social media starts to generate on its own. You know, it's funny because when we put out the first Cleveland TV Tales, a friend of Paige Palmer's, who was friends with her in her later years, writes, I really question the validity of this research because I never knew Paige Palmer to smoke. She smoked 4 packs a day.
Wow.
That was in 1964. But the thing was, she also quit in 1964 cold turkey. Ooh. And I very politely said, the only thing I find that's unbelievable about this is show me somebody who could smoke 4 packs a day and could quit cold turkey.
Sure.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
And she did. So it turns out, I knew I still had my research, and sure enough, there it was in a newspaper article in 1965 saying she quit 4 packs a day. And that just generated, and next thing you know, everybody was jumping on it. And it works to your favor. Social media, as much as I try to avoid it because it's a commitment, is there and it's not going away. And the nice thing about social media too is a lot of times people will actually add to it, in your favor, on your behalf, which is nice because you have friends, you have people reading it. I've had people contact me that I had not seen since high school, and they're asking me questions about the book, which makes me feel pretty good because they live in Chattanooga.
Oh, good.
Oh, yeah,
good,
that's great.
Good.
So
Sure.
how's a good way for people to get in touch with you?
The best way to do it is probably, we have email, of course, and I can give you my Kent State email, and that's one I go to the most frequently. I must have 10 email addresses. Anyway, I'm obviously on Facebook, so you can get to me there. Or my email address is molszew1@kent.edu.
Okay, perfect. And that's the best way for anybody who's listening to get in touch with you. Great.
Yeah, that or Facebook, because automatically when something comes to kent.edu, it automatically goes to my home email, and plus I check kent.edu constantly because my students are always asking me questions. So
Sure. And then
I'm on it 4 or 5 times a day.
what's the best way for our audience members to purchase your book?
Well, the bookstores, obviously, we still have Barnes & Noble. And here's another thing. Please support the small bookstores. The Learned Owl, Fireside, Chagrin Falls, they're all just terrific. There's another one in Mansfield that's just great, Main Street Books. I mean, they handle all of our books, but also Amazon is there and Barnes & Noble is online. But, oddly enough, for the first book, Radio Days, David Sparrow's dad did Upbeat, and his name was Herman Sparrow. He did Upbeat, Polka Varieties, and a lot of those shows. David contacted me and he said, "You're not going to believe this. I'm in Seattle and they have your book here on the shelf."
My gosh.
Great.
Yeah, and I said, "Well, I didn't know that. It was, I hope somebody buys it. So.
Right.
I needed that $1.50 royalties.
Right.
You know.
Oh, what about libraries? Did you ever go to a library and give them a book, or they purchase it just on their own?
The great thing is libraries all have budgets, and it's in every library that I can imagine. And I mean Amherst, all over, like
Great.
far-reaching places for me. The other thing about libraries, we love speaking at libraries. We do it a lot. And it's just the greatest thing because these are people that want to be there, not like my students who pay to be there.
Yeah. So
Right.
good. So there's one of your marketing tools is going to libraries and speaking. Going to libraries and
Yes.
speaking. Okay. All right.
Absolutely. And we speak to other groups and agents and, just about anybody that would like us to speak. And, the older the better a lot of times because they remember TV and radio.
Mm-hmm. Well, Mike, it's been great having you as a guest here on the Author Inside You podcast. Thank you very much for spending your time with us today.
It has been my great honor, and thank you very much, and continued success with your podcast, too.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks.
If you haven't already, please head over to Apple Podcasts and subscribe to The Author Inside You.
And until next time.
Right on.
Thank you for listening to the Author Inside You podcast with your host, Leah and Matt Rafferty.